Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the I Thought You'd Like to Know show. This is your host, Pat Flynn. I'm delighted and excited for my guest this evening. I am joined by Sister Marysia Weber, who is a religious sister of Mercy of Alma, Michigan. She is a physician who started in family practice. She completed her residency training at the Mayo Clinic and is board certified in psychiatry and neurology. She has been in practice for over 30 years and has offered workshops on human formation for priests, seminarians, and consecrated religious. She is currently the vicar for religious for the Archdiocese of St. Louis. Sister Marysia, thank you so much for taking the time to join me.
Well, thank you for the invitation, Pat.
Yeah, my pleasure, and I'm very interested in this new book that you've written. I have to admit, it's of a certain subject that I am not altogether familiar with, but I'm very curious about, which is formation, and the title is called the Art of Accompaniment. So I say, let's start with the basics, and this will be an educational experience for me, and I hope many of the listeners as well. When we talk about formation, what do we mean by that? I mean, what is formation? I think this is something that a lot of Catholics hear in passing, but maybe they don't have the exact right idea of what that is.
Sure. Well, formation basically is making a place for the Lord to dwell in us and transform us. And so we're moved by that grace, and we make ourselves available to God's work in us. And that's really formation. And it's particular to our vocation, to priesthood, to permanent diaconate, to consecrated life, or sacramental marriage for that matter. So we're all about being formed, and God's grace is always a part of that. In my book in particular, looking at seminary formation, it has many aspects to human and Christian formation of all members of the Universal Church. But the modalities and the characteristics that relate specifically to preparing a man called a priesthood is what I address in this book.
So that's very interesting to me because as a married man, you've immediately identified something that I can relate to, and I think that's a really important point because I think when most people or most Catholics think about the word formation, they immediately associate it with priests. But you're saying it's much greater than that. It goes, even though you specialize and you've written a book specifically for priests, formation is something that applies to more than people who are just discerning the priesthood. Correct?
Yes. As a religious woman, consecrated life, we speak about basic formation. So we learn about our foundress, we learn about the charism, we learn about the day-to-day aspect of life, and through that, come to a discernment. Is this really what I'm called to? Is this going to enliven me and enrich me? Are the graces of God here for me? And there's a formator, and so that's very much part of consecrated life. And like I said, even marriage life. How is it that you grow in deepening love of one another? And as sacramentally married Catholics, how is it that you reflect on God's presence? What is He inviting you into? How do you work with the ups and downs of the challenges and the joys that you have that form you, that change you, that enrich you, that allow you to be loving, supportive, making the best possible choices as spouse, as father, mother? That's formation.
Yeah, and I mean, now I've got a million questions about that, but we'll stay on topic here. We'll stay on target with what specifically your book has to talk about. But let's keep with the basics now, because the book is called The Art of Accompaniment. We have an idea now of what formation is, but what does it mean to accompany someone along their journey of formation?
Okay, good question. So to form a seminarian, particularly, requires the right kind of accompaniment because it's to a specific vocation. And the recent ratio states that a formator needs to possess the abilities and resources so as to provide the right kind of accompaniment. And in that they describe as it being balanced, respectful of the freedom and the conscience of the seminarian that will really help him in his human and spiritual growth. So my book is really about some of the real specific tasks of formation and the art of accompaniment. And although it's intended, for new seminary formators, the practical steps that I've described in accompaniment are also useful for the seasoned formator.
I'm sorry. I was just curious if maybe we could hear of what some of those practical steps might be.
Surely. So if we think of accompaniment as meaning the man, knowing the man on a deeper or more personal level, or walking alongside of him in the seminary. You walk alongside of your spouse, but if we're going to stay with the seminarian, being with him in his joys and sorrows throughout his time of formation. And the purpose of doing so the purpose of accompaniment, is to discern with him, the seminary community, and the larger church community, whether indeed he has a vocation to Catholic priesthood. And a formator, though, needs to recognize that the art of accompaniment really begins accepting the man where he is. I mean, we all come at a certain level of development, human development, spiritual development, but then there's the desire to help him grow and embrace the fullness of his call. That, of course, doesn't happen overnight, but it's a gradual process. So as I'm describing accompaniment, you can see that it's not just a mere functional role, but it's really being a genuine presence in the seminarian's life and in that discernment process. And that's what all the chapters that follow in the book address more specifically. Like chapter 1, chapter 1, forming seminary formators in the art of accompaniment, I talk about 5 specific steps that a formator would engage in to come to a deeper understanding of the man that he or she is accompanying. And this really should begin before the first meeting. And with appropriate consent, there's a lot of information already there. He's written his biographical sketch. He's had letters of recommendations. He's had a psychological assessment. And it's helpful to look at what he said about himself and what others have said, and even what the psychological profile suggests. Is he collaborative? Is he service-oriented? Does he establish and maintain relationships with appropriate boundaries? Those are good prognostic signs of human formation. And if they aren't present, can these frailties noted can be overcome with formation or with therapy? So you see, you're just trying to get a sense of who this person is and wondering where this process of human growth and development can go, especially with the obligation that you have to help form him.
Yeah.
Because none of us are perfect.
Yeah, well, certainly. So the first step is sort of an assessment step, meeting them where they are, trying to get some idea of, perhaps acceptance of certain limitations, or seeing what areas can we help this person to make them more, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for here? I don't want to say malleable, because that's not what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to help them to discover a deeper level of discernment, right? But there might be some initial blockages at the beginning, like you said, that like can we work with this through therapy or other means, so on and so forth. But that first step is really about sort of general assessment. Is that what I'm taking away from this?
Yes. So that way you can see where you can help this man move forward in the richness of a vocation. And then the second step really involves clarifying what is expected of the seminarian as well, because that'll help establish the tenor of the meetings as a sacred time, which the Holy Spirit plays a principal role in the life of the seminarian. But he is the one that's most responsible for his formation. Nobody's going to do this for him. This is something that is his to do and to grow into, like an athlete. You can offer him the exercises to train himself to be a better pitcher or whatever it is, but he's the one who's got to engage in the day-to-day aspects of that. Mm-hmm. And there might be, something that's troubling him, something that's challenging for him. Maybe he's delighting in God's work in his life. So these are things that he would need to bring himself to a formation meeting, for example.
So the role of the person who's accompanying is really sort of an aid or an instructor in a sense that the person in formation is really in a process of discovery and a lot of self-discovery. So they might help try to course correct a little, but it really is something that whoever is discerning, whoever is in formation is really coming to know ultimately by and through themselves. Is that correct?
Yes, with the grace of God, and also because we're kind of blind to our own. We're subjective to our own, so it's helpful to have some feedback from another person. And that's where the formator, working with other seminarians, we're trying to discover God's design looking back at our lives. And we've all had the experience that we had an event that really only made sense in the light of a present circumstance. Mm-hmm. And how is it that a man begins to integrate all that he has experienced in life that has brought him to the seminary as part of his own salvation history, and really the now more specific journey of call to priestly formation.
Yeah, that's all of this stuff, like I said, a little bit new to me, but extremely interesting. I'm already getting a lot of insights out of this. So all right, so we're up to step 3 now. What's the next step in the process?
Well, step 4 is where the formator engages a little bit more, because he's accompanied the seminarian, looking how God was present in an experience that he had, helping the seminarian look at this through the lens of a faith, an opportunity to ponder how past experiences regarded parts of God's design for him, kind of unfolding. But with the affective growth and development process, then he needs to really grow in self-knowledge. So he's gleaned things over the course of meetings. He's learned things theologically. He's been involved in other activities that help him understand more who he is and grow in his own personal freedom. This is just a very important aspect. It's got to be more comprehensive understanding of himself that he freely embraces. And would include also him incorporating those experiences of childhood and adolescence that have influenced him to this point. An example that I'd like to give is if a seminarian had a difficult relationship with his father, then he might project some of his unresolved hurts into present experiences, and that might affect how he relates to parishioners, for example. So if those kinds of things come up, they're noted in his relationships with some other seminarians or some of the superiors, or he picks this up himself, he would benefit from really addressing this emotional past and how it's impacting him so that he can be freer of it. So again, you see something that enriches the human person in this early phase of embracing an identity as priest.
Yeah. And then step 5, if you could take us through that one.
With step 5, the formator then looks for qualities that the seminary has that indicate a suitability for priesthood. And this really occurs over the whole course of seminary formation. So even though this is a step that I've listed initially, this happens over the whole course of formation. So you would look at, is he motivated by Christ and love for the church? Does he have a willingness to give himself to others in small ways, because priesthood is a vocation of service? Does he exhibit charity? These kinds of things that the formator really is responsible for helping the seminarian discern. Is he embracing and benefiting from formation?
So One thing I'm interested in, Sister Marysia, especially in the title, The Art of Accompaniment. Whenever I think of the art of something, I always think, there's probably a number of common mistakes that people make when it comes to this particular art. And as somebody who's very new to this, and people who might be listening, or who might already be, or thinking about entering into this vocation, what are some of the common mistakes that people should look out for, and what are some ways to maybe correct those mistakes?
That goes to Chapter 3 with regards to, some aspects of communication skills. When I have had the opportunity to speak with formators and offer workshops, there are 6 basic skills of communication that are formative, that are important, like reflective listening. Individuals think that, listening is easy to do, but actually listening is a work. You've got to really try to hear what the other person is saying. We're so inclined to just want to jump in and fill in the gaps or say what we think they want to say when, we may not quite have it right. So I think that's an important skill. So he needs to understand what the seminarian meant by what he said, and also trying to confirm the accuracy of what he understood. For example, if a seminarian would say, "I wish I were more outgoing," and he might actually mean, "I feel lonely, I want to have more friends, I get nervous when I speak in front of a crowd, I should spend more time getting to know people, I can't always think of saying, what I want to say." So you don't have a sense as to what he really means until you just ask him what he means. I want to be more outgoing as a priest. So you've got to just take the time and kind of like a slow throttle, just being present to that seminarian and ask him. And also, it's very important to have open-ended questions, not how's formation going, or how's your courses going? Fine, not so fine, but it needs to involve a bit more specifics. What was it like to hear, to learn? What were you thinking at the time? What have you thought about since? What effect did that have on you? What effect does this have on you now? What do you think you need to do at this time? What else will help? Those kinds of questions open up a deeper self-understanding and sharing, so that the seminarian actually grows and be able to grow in knowing himself. Self-knowledge is very, very key for all of us. Again, these skills that I'm talking about are not important just for seminarians, but they're important just for human maturation and development.
Yeah, I was just going to say, what great general life advice this is. The skill of listening. Most people can hear things, but not everybody is listening to what they hear, right? And yeah, what a really good salient lesson for everybody to come to understand these skills. And I know one part, we were talking a little bit earlier about this too, not just listening, but paying attention to other cues, like nonverbal cues and nonverbal language as well. Would you mind expanding on that a little bit, and some things that people should be looking for in that department?
Sure. Linguists tell us that actually only 7% of what we speak has to do with communication, and 93% of communication is nonverbal. They talk about 55% of communication being body movements, facial expressions, gestures with the arms, or 38% being the tone of voice or the modulation of the pauses. An example, to convey 2 very different meanings. For example, if I were to say, "You're feeling uncomfortable," or "You're feeling uncomfortable." One clearly is a question, and the other is clearly a statement. I'm acknowledging maybe something that somebody said to me. And that's very typical of our English language, our American language. And as a psychiatrist, having done this for a couple of decades, when persons come to me about, difficult situations they had or something that still remains unresolved, they often don't remember all the words that were said, but they remember the tone of voice, which they attribute, a specific meaning to. They attribute the facial gestures and the body movements that speak oftentimes louder than those words in their memory of what actually happened.
Yeah, but another really great point, and again, something that I hope everybody listening should be able to apply and start trying to better understand, just to be a better communicator, to be a better listener, to be able to have a deeper connection, a more meaningful connection with people. So I want to return to a point that you brought up right before that, which is the idea of human maturation. I remember, again, earlier you said that this is something that's hard to quantify, but very important to understand and to try to get right. So perhaps you could talk on that a little bit for us.
Yes, human maturing is key for all of us. Are we growing? Are we developing to become, functional individuals in the world, in our vocation to marriage or whatever our vocation is? And it is important to have somehow markers of that growth. In fact, the program for priestly formation states that since formation assumes that a seminarian will be growing both in God's grace and in his free human response to that grace, it is important that there be a process to note the markers of that growth. Now, that's a challenge to develop a procedure or a means that reflects the level of human maturation of a seminarian and his suitability for ordination. It's easier to assess intellectual formation, for example, because you can grade an exam, on a course or a paper that's more objective and quantifiable. However, human qualities are observable and they can be described for assessment, and that's what my chapter 2 is about. I offer formators means of looking at that. I cite 6 interrelated markers of human maturation that are common really to all theories, psychological theories. They have different names, but they have basically different principles. And there are 6 of them. There's self-knowledge. Once we can't do anything that we're unaware of. So something's got to be brought to self-awareness. Once we're self-aware, that we can grow in self-knowledge. Once we have a knowledge of what we're doing, we can then bring it to a certain direction. Maybe it's a different direction of how we act, how we say things. And then once we do that and see a different direction works better, we're developing a little bit more self-control. So we're now growing in a way that we more want to be, that's more becoming to a growing level of human maturity. And once we do that, then there's more self-discipline. We're developing a habit of this. And ultimately, once we've really got it part of me, in formation we speak of the term of self-governance, where now we're living more with regards to a life of virtue. How does it become a virtue? How I relate to persons. And ultimately then there's spiritual fatherhood. So in this chapter, I describe each of these different levels of human maturation and then cite specific questions that would indicate to a formator, as well as a seminarian could look at this himself in addition, and see, is he exhibiting some of these signs of self-knowledge? Or does he have limited signs of self-knowledge and also self-direction? So this can be very helpful for the formator. At the very end of the book, I have templates that the formators can use where they can check off where somebody has demonstrated affective maturity or limits an aspect of maturity in these 6 different areas. And then from there can look at a composite picture where they can then develop a narrative assessment that reflects the seminarian's strengths, where he has room to grow, and then practical recommendations that help address his specific vocational growth. And again, these are things that would be true of any vocation.
Well, Sister, I have to say, I am deeply interested in myself. I feel like this would just be a general great self-help book, even for me. But I love how practical and specific you've made it as well. But I'm listening to everything you're talking about here, especially self-knowledge and self-awareness and how important that is in this specific instance. But I think about my life and how important that was of a skill to develop and how beneficial that was to me as well. So I'm just delighted to hear and delighted to read all the things that you have to say on it. Even if I'm not exactly your target market for this, I just I feel like maybe there's a lot that everybody listening will be able to get out of this book. But with that said, and I do have a few more questions about the book specifically, but before we get to that, who really is the type of person that should be picking up this book? When you wrote this book, who did you have in your mind? Who were you writing this book for?
Specifically, seminary formators who have the responsibility of helping men who believe they have a call to the priesthood, discern that, and also become richer human beings themselves. I also wrote it for religious and superiors and formators. I'm a consecrated religious myself, and these principles fit very well with human formation in consecrated life. So those are the two primary audiences for whom I have written this for. And it's more specifically, I would say, for priestly formation, but you could look at these questions and apply them just like you have commented, Pat, in your own regard and in your own particular setting.
Yeah. So just one more question. I want to make sure we mention where people can grab a copy of this book. But one of the contributors is Sister Joseph Marie Roosman. And if you wouldn't mind, could you tell a little bit about her story and the impact that her work has had on the book?
Absolutely. She's a religious sister of mercy in my community who passed away August 17 in 2017. And she was the General Secretary of the Religious Sisters of Mercy of Alma. She was a canon lawyer, a civil lawyer, and she consulted for our community and many other institutes. And she taught canon law in classes. And she wrote this article that offers a comprehensive study of the historical development of the concept of internal and external fora in church documents. And she presented this material to formators and rectors and bishops, and they commented they had not seen anything so succinctly clarify the distinctions made in church documents, which consider the norms seminaries are to follow regarding confidentiality, because confidentiality is a very important area. So in her paper, she articulates the important differences between the role of the formator and the role of the spiritual director, where there's an overlapping of roles of the formator and spiritual director, what's reserved for the internal forum and for the spiritual director and by whom it's reserved. And then in her conclusion, she offers elements that are to be included in the statement of policy concerning confidentiality that can be put into seminary handbooks. And at the very end, she also offers a review of the church documents which address seminary norms and suggest procedures to clarify the understanding and acceptance of the role and extent of confidentiality in seminaries, which is a very important aspect of formation. We want to respect the individual. He has a right to privacy, and at the same time, how do each formator's role, rector's role, spiritual director's role fit into that? And how is the seminarian then relating to those individuals to share with transparency in order then to be able to benefit from formation and really be of service to the whole church?
Yeah, and what an important contribution that is. And I'm very excited to continue reading through this book, and I think that even though, again, I'm not in this particular field, I feel like this is something that I'm going to get a lot out of personally. All the skills that you mentioned are things that I'm interested in, know that I need improvement in as well. So my final question, Sister, is this. The book is out. Where is the best place for people to go and get themselves a copy?
Amazon. It's available in Kindle as well as hard copy. So you just go to Amazon. You can type in my name, or you can type in, the title of the book itself, The Art of Accompaniment, Practical Steps for the Seminary Formator. It will be available there. I might add also the very last chapter. There are a lot of templates for formators to be able to use the material for an individual seminarian, and then use that for guiding purposes as well as assessment purposes. And I also have a practicum in the book for seminary formators where they as a group can practice some of the skills, especially the communication skills, taking the role of a seminarian or the role of a formator and getting feedback from, their confreres so that they can also grow in these skill sets. And this has been very helpful for new seminary formators, but I've also gotten feedback from seasoned seminary formators that they appreciated a practicum addressing some of these specific skills as well.
Yeah, what a wonderful additional resource that is to include in there. I love the cover art as an aside, by the way.
It's lovely.
Very, very lovely, very attractive book. So I want to highly encourage everybody to head over to Amazon, The Art of Accompaniment, Practical Steps for the Seminary Formator. Sister Marysia, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today, and I hope that we can have another conversation soon because you're very much a person who I'd love to sit down and pick your brain on a wide variety of topics. So thank you, really.
Thank you very much, Pat.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.